I know what you said at length about the negotiations between Trump and Iran, or more precisely between the US and Iran, which we have discussed with you before, also on the Night Agency, but the postponement of these negotiations and the attacks in Iran were also discussed with you in the same way. If you wish, we can listen in front of the map. Now, I wonder what all this actually means. I would like to hear it from your eyes, from your language. But there is also a situation like this. Trump is also intimidating the world a little bit. That whoever buys oil from Iran will be cut off from the US, you know, the negotiations were going on. What happened? Does it mean that these negotiations were stopped there? So should we understand that the fourth one is not going to happen at all?
That is to say, I don't want to give so much meaning to the negotiations directly. I prefer not to. I do not believe that negotiations alone have led to this result. I also think that Iran and the US gave different meanings and sat at that table for different purposes. And
here's what the foreign minister of Oman said. If the parties agree, a new date will be set.
Starting with Iran, why does this negotiation table mean different things for both sides? In the past 2 years, Iran has experienced a process in which it has lost its asymmetric capabilities, which is the area in which it is most trusted by Israel in the region, perhaps the area in which it can act most comfortably, both in the Syrian arena and directly in the Gaza issue, in the process of the ongoing genocide in Gaza. This is a huge fiasco in terms of Iran's prestige, in terms of the regime's position against its own people inside, and in terms of Iran's deterrence, perhaps to a great extent. Why do I say this? Israel, as it wanted to, softened the tension and escalation against Iran and then escalated it again. In other words, the Netanyahu government has actually turned Iran into a useful tool, an apparatus. It has preferred to open its own internal jam, its military political jam in Gaza, with Iran. And while we were talking about Israel's genocide in Gaza, we were also talking about Israel's attacks against Hezbollah. We talked about a decisive action against Lebanon. This was because Iran was unable to respond to this. Therefore, in a scenario where Iran has lost so many positions in 2 years and in the Syrian civil war, especially Turkey's support for the opposition and the fall of the regime in Damascus at the end of the day, the fall of a regime against Turkey also means Iran's loss again. Therefore, for Iran, which has lost so many positions in the region, which has actually lost the ground beneath its feet, economic problems are already creating problems internally. Infrastructure problems create serious problems. We remember the electricity issue. In the past months, Iran has reached a point where it has had difficulty in supplying electricity even to its own capital. Therefore, the regime in Iran needs a breathing space right now. And they need this breathing space in the face of a negotiation step from the United States, which of course they have to cling to, because all the famous trade sanctions and embargoes are in place. Iran is in a serious bind, and when you think of Russia and China as the actors with whom Iran can perhaps establish the most bilateral relations in the world in this sense, there is an uncertainty between China and the US today. We are in a period when Russia cannot even hold Syria because of the war in Ukraine. So at some point, Iran will have its own... They were at a point where they had to take care of their own business, and they were in a difficult situation. At this point, for Iran, this negotiating table is actually a necessity. And it is a table they have to have, although they attach very serious meanings to their nuclear work. After all, if Iran becomes a nuclear power, suddenly the geopolitics of the region will change. Iran's position will change globally. For them, nuclear work stands on one side, perhaps as a red line. But at the same time, these nuclear studies. We also know that they have a trump card in a bargain. During the Obama era, when there was a signal from the US to negotiate a table against the US, they sat at the table without hesitation. Here, especially regarding the exchange of enriched uranium at that time. In other words, a swap in which Iran's enriched uranium would be taken away and replaced with uranium that could only be used in energy production. At least at its most basic level, it is a negotiation based on such a logic. It was followed by a negotiation that paved the way for Iran economically. It brought a period of easing of sanctions, and as a result of that, we saw Iran suddenly expanding everywhere in the Syrian arena. At the same time, it was able to expand its sphere of influence in the region, because this was a period when it suddenly found a breathing space. Therefore, it needs something like this today. They have to take a step that will at least buy time, without giving up their nuclear work completely. That's why that table is very important for them. And it is not a table where they have a plan B, a way out. They are in an absolutely doomed position to the US, on the US side, but it's a little bit different. I mean, we remember that Trump had already withdrawn from the nuclear deal with Iran during his previous presidency, and he broke the table. So Iran is actually a potential area of tension for him, just like Israel. It can turn to Iran like a hammer of help when it needs it. Iran...
Then those who buy oil from Iran should forget their cooperation with us?
The fact that Trump has come to this point now is because of the negotiating table itself. Separate. Trump is skidding in other areas.
So let's see the negotiating table differently. Trump's statement will be interpreted differently.
The negotiating table is of no importance for America either. Because at the end of the day, America will deal with Iran if it wants to deal. No matter what the terms are, whatever the terms, there are certain terms that America has already put forward. What is the step back that they are going to ask from Iran? To stop enrichment activities, to ease economic sanctions in return. So it will be something just like in the Obama era. The mechanism is more or less clear. But the US approach to Iran so far, from the day Trump was elected until now, has been to pass the time. Because Iran was at one point in the 4th or 5th place. The issues that Trump has been directly engaged in since he became president. If you look at the Gaza issue, Ukraine, the European Union, and China, the big one has always carried polemics over these. Iran remained in the 5th or 6th place. At that time, it was also a matter of curiosity what he would do about Iran. Just some generic statements. We can punish Iran, but we can also sit at the table. He is actually very flexible. He was taking it on the basis of rhetoric that whatever they did would not prove him wrong until this time. Where are we now in terms of Trump? The peace table he wants in Ukraine has not yet been established. Even the deal with Zelensky on strategic materials, on rare earth elements. So months have passed, 3 months, 100 days have passed. At the end of 100 days, this is his first achievement in Ukraine. There is no table yet. The clashes continue.
Is that a real achievement too?
Of course. We will talk about that in detail.
Yes.
You look at the Israeli side. He set up a ceasefire table in Gaza. The table fell apart. No aid has been going to Gaza for more or less 2 months. Israel continues to increase the violence and the dose as it wants. They martyred more than 2,000 people during this time. So there is no ceasefire. Trump's vision here has also collapsed. You look at the European side. We have already talked about this last week. When you are so dispersed, you have to show something on the ground for your threat to be reciprocated. Tariffs have been increased against Europeans. The European Union countries have the economic depth to respond to these tariffs, at least in the short term, if not in the long term. They were giving it. It has not made the political gains it wanted. Now, while it is in such a skidding state in other areas, a victory is needed. So at least public opinion, support in American domestic politics. According to the poll numbers, it seems to be falling. There is an observable drop in support behind Trump. It is something observable. Now, in such an environment, he needs to give an enemy to his own public opinion, and he needs a short-term victory. At least he should be able to say this. Look, Iran. A threat to the whole region, a threat to the world. He has nuclear ambitions, and I'm punishing him.
Yes.
He needs to be able to say that so that he can at least give a victory to his own voters, to his own side. So far, he has not found anything to feed his popularity in foreign policy. I see a huge preparation problem in Trump's foreign policy choices. I mean, it is a very interesting mistake that he suddenly believes that the rhetoric of the American president can create such deterrence, both for him and his team. I mean, under normal conditions, if you are making such a threat, you need to take a step to ensure the credibility of that threat. So if you give tariffs to the European Union, if you impose tariffs on China, you expect something in return. So for example, now I'm going back to the old idea, you put troops in Taiwan. For example, regarding NATO in Europe, for example, you withdraw troops from certain parts of certain US bases. So the threat, you make them feel it concretely. You need to have credibility. And this is a deterrence, so that a deterrence can emerge from here. When you don't do this, then America will not incur any cost. And when it threatens, everyone will have to do everything it says, which is what we have seen in many countries so far, for example, in Russia. They are testing America's borders at every moment, so Trump has a very clear demand for a ceasefire there. Putin is probably stretching it to sit at the best possible point. So he is keeping it waiting. There is no punishment here. There is no punitive action coming from America. And the Europeans are doing this to a large extent. Today, as I said, it is not only a matter of foreign political interests. Domestic interests are also very important. In other words, I think the part related to Trump's own popularity is very, very decisive. When there are no certain gains from here, or when he increases the dose of attacks on Europe too much at the level of discourse, suddenly had to soften in the last month. I mean, Ukraine humiliates Zelensky. A week later, he can make another statement against Zelensky, Europe, or similar things. It's like if you put forward tariffs, it becomes necessary to ease those tariffs. Back to what we will reach first. Yes, so you see that he cannot hold his position because it cannot come up with anything concrete. Now, in such an environment, Iran is doing just like Israel did. You know, it's a very useful tool here. Iran's capacity, its conventional capacity, is very limited. And Iran, that has never been able to escalate, even against Israel in general, has no chance to do so against the United States. Never able to give a clear response.